Welcome to Heart Stories, a podcast proudly brought to you by the Caulfield Grammarians Association. I'm your host, Doreen Brown, and this season we celebrate the journeys, passions, and values of remarkable individuals, many of whom share a connection to the Caulfield community. This series is a platform for heartfelt conversations that shine a light on creativity, leadership, and a sense of community that define extraordinary lives. At Heart Stories, we believe every achievement begins with a story. Together, we'll uncover the challenges, milestones, and lessons that have shaped our guests. Through their insights, we'll explore how shared values and a commitment to making a difference inspire both individuals and communities to thrive. So thank you for joining us. Settle in, open your mind, and get ready to discover stories that inspire, empower, and unite. This is Heart Stories. Let's begin. On today's episode of Heart Stories, we're thrilled to welcome Jessie Marlow, an acclaimed Melbourne-based photographer whose incredible body of work has earned a place in prestigious collections, including the National Gallery of Victoria, Australian Parliament House, Monash Gallery of Art, City of Melbourne, and the State Library of Victoria. Jessie's career achievements are nothing short of remarkable. In 2003, he published his debut book, Centre Bounce, Football from Australia's Heart, which showcased the cultural heart of Australian football. Over the years, his work has been celebrated globally with features in books like Street Photography Now and The World's Atlas of Street Photography. Recognised for his exceptional talent, Jessie was awarded the International Street Photographer of the Year award in 2011 and the Bowness Prize in 2012. Join us as we explore Jessie's fascinating journey from his formative years at Caulfield Grammar to building an extraordinary career in photography and his reflections on storytelling, creativity, and the enduring impact of the communities he belongs to. Welcome, Jessie, and thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Doreen. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So can you begin by telling us a little bit about your time at Caulfield Grammar School and what are some of your standout memories from those years?
So I came to Caulfield in, I think it was 1991, and I started in year seven. My older brother, Lane, he was in year nine at the time. So I came in from local primary school, didn't know too many people,
Yeah.
had always swam against Caulfield Grammar in inter-school swimming sports and was always amazed at how good they were at inter-school swimming and always thought, I can't wait to join this school. I turned up in year seven and from that moment on, I was part of the school. You know, for me, I think looking back, it was probably the friendships, the opportunities, and also the support from a lot of the teachers and my peers that I look back on and reflect really fondly of my time there.
Now, how did your experience at Caulfield Grammar School shape your creative perspective or influence and your storytelling approach as a photographer?
Looking back, I think probably as a student, I remember the support I was given from the teachers, in particularly some of my art department teachers, and it was their curiosity and support in me that really helped instill that in me as a photographer. And then being a photographer and doing this work that I do with documentary photography over the years, I think you need to have that curiosity. It started back then when I was at high school and then
Yeah.
just continued on throughout it.
Yeah. Now, you've touched on this a little bit, but were there any Caulfield teachers, subjects, or school programs that helped nurture your interest in photography or the arts?
Where do I start? I was very lucky when I was at the school. Obviously, there was the starting point for me was the art department. I was very lucky to have a number of teachers in the art department, starting off with Max Greason. He was a graphics teacher that
Yeah.
really helped me early on. And then there was Ross Brooks, who's still I think he's the longest serving current teacher, and he was really key in my interest in graphics and photography. And then there was Anne Petrie, who was the photography teacher, and she was just a wonderful teacher and woman. And looking back, she used to go in on school holidays because photography and using the darkroom and these sorts of things were not really things you could kind of do in a 45-minute period. So
No.
By the time you got into the dark room and you got your negative out,
Hmm.
chose which picture you wanted to print, and then you
Yes.
put it onto the enlarger and started to expose the paper and then put the paper into the chemicals. It's a bit of a process. So
Yeah.
in 45 minutes, you might get, half a print done. So
Yeah.
in having Anne DePetri as our photography teacher, she would go in on weekends and school holidays and stay back after school and stay there till 8:30 and really give us that opportunity to develop our work and pursue what we were trying to get out of the photography class. So
Yeah.
without her and that support that she gave us, I think probably wouldn't have been possible. And then while I was there, I also had my history teacher who was my year 11 history teacher, Rodney Knight, who I was there for a number of years. He was another crucial teacher in my development. I think I was sitting in his year 11 history class and probably mucking around a bit, sitting in the back row and probably not paying attention to him like I
Yeah.
should have been, like some of the other students were. And I remember he pulled me aside one day after class and he said to me, he said, what are you into? What are you into? Like, what do you do on weekends? And I told him I was into photography and that was my passion and my interest. And he said, well, look, I run the school magazine. Why don't you come and take some photos for the school magazine if that's what your passion and interest is?
Oh,
And he gave me that first opportunity. So to kind of, I think of photography as something as that could end up being a profession for me. So he unlocked that potential in me.
yeah.
We've been friends ever since, and we catch up a couple of times a year, and we often laugh. And I think he basically just wanted to get me out of his class because I was being a bit disruptive. So he gave me this role, and it ended up, being something I've continued to do, working for the school for a number of years, still taking pictures for them. So yeah, I've got to thank Rodney.
That's remarkable. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Caulfield is known for fostering a strong sense of community. How do you think this sense of connection influenced the way you approach your work and the subjects that you choose to capture?
Like I mentioned before, it's the connections and that curiosity that I think I really developed and learnt while I was at Caulfield, which I think has then flowed through into my own personal work, which
Yeah.
is pretty crucial for a lot of the work that I do and building up those relationships. Done a lot of work with Indigenous communities up in the Northern Territory, and that's been 20 years worth of ongoing work with some of those communities. And I think it goes back to some of the things you learn when you're at school, and in particular for me, when it was, my time at Caulfield, that some of those, those little connections you make and those friendships you make, you know, can get on to, bigger and long-standing, friendships
Yeah.
and commitments.
Excellent. Now, was there a defining moment or experience during or shortly after your school years that really sparked your love for photography? So you mentioned the teacher who obviously came in on weekends and spent that time with you, and then being part of taking these, images for the school and those kinds of things. If you can expand or share any other experiences about that.
I think it was probably just those two in particular, but from those two opportunities that I was given while I was at the school in year 12 and year 11. It was things that kind of came about because of them. So I was
Yeah,
lucky enough to be selected into the Top Cats Award, which was I think they still run it actually. It's at the National Gallery, and it's a exhibition of different VCE graduation work and from across
cool.
the state. And I
Yeah.
had my work, I think, chosen in that when I was doing year 12 art when I was in
Mhm.
year 11. And having that selected into Top Cats was a pivotal thing, which I think really helped with that next phase of my work. And I think it's just those opportunities and those relationships that was formed back then that have set up the foundation for,
Yeah.
what I'm doing today, which is still, I suppose, a continuation of what I was doing then, just taking pictures and doing it for myself.
How fortunate, right? To think that you can follow that passion and turn that into a career. It may not have dawned on you in year seven, obviously, when you started, but by the end of it, you were like, yeah, I could actually do this as something in my future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was at school, I remember being in year 11 and starting to think about, what courses I may do
Yeah.
post high school. And photography was probably not really something that, I thought of as a proper profession right at that time. I was probably thinking more about graphic design as an actual profession. And
Yes.
so, I went from not really thinking of it as something that I could do long term, to getting an opportunity, which then led to applying at different courses, missing out on some courses, some prestigious photography courses around Melbourne that I didn't get into, but I was lucky enough to get into a TAFE course,
Yeah.
which really got me out into the industry. And I think photography, and the photography that I do in particular, is one of those professions that sometimes it's real life experience that I think is kind of what's key, rather than, you don't need to necessarily learn all the technical side of it. I think
Yeah.
it's as important to make connections and build relationships with different people and magazines and newspapers and commercial clients and different communities, and that's what I was able to do, and
Yeah.
what I've done.
Yeah, you highlight a really good key point there. It's the life experiences, right? It's things that you can't learn in a classroom, but things that you have to learn just in real life. So
Just from
yeah.
being out there and meeting people, and that's what I've always done. And I think my time at Caulfield was that was what it was about, and I think it really set me up to sort of get out there and do that and build those relationships.
Yeah, and what a great platform you have as Melbourne, being the city. It's quite dynamic, quite diverse. I grew up there as well.
Yeah.
Now those environments surely would have inspired some of your storytelling themes in your work. So if you could share a little bit about that.
From about the age of 8 to about year 12, so it was about a 10-year period, I was taking photos around Melbourne of the
Yep.
graffiti that began appearing in the mid 1980s. And that was my first real taste of being out on the street with a camera. And my mum and dad would drive me around on weekends and school holidays, and I'd take the photos. But when I was in year 11, and I was friends with some of the guys from year 12 that year, and they were going into the city after school and on weekends and taking pictures around Flinders Street.
It's well
Yeah,
known.
and a few of them sort of took me under their wing a bit, and let me tag along on a few of their photo trips into the city. And I remember we were walking around in school uniform with our cameras, and just I suppose the mid '90s, there's a bit of grit, bit of grunge around the city,
Hmm.
so just drawn to different characters around the station. And I think that was that next step in my development as a photographer, of being out there with a camera on the street, looking to photograph real life. And I think, yeah, it was just a really fun period. And I'm still friends with some of those guys from that year level. And it's funny, our daughters both go to Caulfield now. So I
Yeah.
see Paul Wilson. So I see him at netball games on Saturday at school, and
Yep.
always thank him for letting me tag along on a few of those trips with him.
How lovely. And I love that it's so many generations, isn't it? Then once you're at Caulfield, it kind of, yeah, plants that seed, and then it continues through, yeah, multiple generations, which is really cool. Now your works are held in prestigious collections like the National Gallery of Victoria and Australian Parliament House. What does seeing your photography celebrated in such a significant way mean to you?
Oh, for me, it's the ultimate to have
Yeah.
works in permanent collections of, institutional galleries and collections. It's a really sort of important sort of, I suppose, milestone in my work, that, a
Yeah.
gallery or an institution has collected it and deemed it worthy to sort of be in their permanent collections. Things like the Parliament House collection, that's some work that I shot with some of the Indigenous communities that I did the football book from. The work in the National Gallery is some of the colour street photography that I do, which you can see behind me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a really nice recognition and makes you think you're doing the right thing sometimes with your work.
Yeah. And such an honor, right?
It's a
Yeah,
real honour.
real honor.
Yeah.
Now, your first book, Centre Bounce, that you've also mentioned, Football from Australia's Heart, dives into the cultural importance of Australian football. How did this project come to life, and did the lessons or experiences from your school years influence its development?
Actually, yeah, that body of work that I turned into my first book, which you just mentioned, Centre Bounce, that was a body of work that I first started because it links back to the school in a funny way. I went on the 1996 England cricket trip, and I
Wow.
had some frequent flyer points, and it was, I think it was 1999, so it was 3 years later. And
Hmm.
I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't an email because it was probably before email.
It was
And I
before.
think yeah,
Yeah.
it was from Qantas, and it was something like, your points are about to expire. You've got, like, whatever it was, 20,000 points. Use them before this date or you lose them. And I quickly called the travel agent and asked them, where can I go? How far can I go with this many points?
Yeah.
And he said as far as I could go was Alice Springs, which wasn't very far. So my dreams of sort of going off to Europe or America were dashed. I quickly did a bit of research about what was on in Alice Springs and found out about this football carnival. And it was a carnival that's held every Easter for Indigenous football teams and communities from around the Northern Territory. And
Cool.
I quickly, like I said, did some more research, found out that this was going to be this amazing photographic opportunity, and
Yeah.
went up there with a big bag of film and shot there for I think maybe it's like 4 or 5 days and
Wow.
photographed the football carnival. And then from that, it was just talking to people and being curious about where some of these teams had come from and getting to meet and know some of the people from the communities that I then started to hear about other communities where the footy was just as important.
Yeah.
And I started just making trips up there for about the next, I think, 3 or 4 years, going back and forth
Hmm.
when I, saved up enough money to get up there and had time off with my other work
Yeah.
to go up and just photograph the game of footy as it was played in the communities. And
How
then
cool.
and then doing the book was a really important stepping stone in my development as a photographer because at that point I was quite young. I was 20, I think 23 when the book came out.
Yeah.
And up until then, when I was sort of looking to get work at different places, I think having a book out really helps with that. Another important step in my career.
Love it. And I love how all of these things have just happened organically.
Yeah,
It's
they
one
kind of just
thing that
do.
leads to another. And yeah, I
Yeah,
love,
everything kind of links back to, a previous body of work or a connection that you make somewhere along the line, and then 5 years later you call that person up, and all of a
yeah.
sudden you're out there taking pictures. And it's funny, 20, I think it's 25 years later, I'm about to go back up and do some work with one of the original communities that I worked with out in the desert. So yeah, it's been an ongoing commitment and connection to some of these places that I've been lucky enough to work in over the years.
Now, Wounded and Don't Just Tell Them, Show Them have solidified your reputation in street photography. What draws you to candid storytelling on the streets, and how do you approach capturing these moments authentically?
So I think the candid photography that I mentioned before, when, I'd go into the city as a year 11 student, I think that's always been closest to my heart. I love
Yeah.
the unknown element of it. I love the fact that I can, leave the house one day with my camera and come home with a picture that ends up being in a body of work. So that's what's probably been the main driver with the work that I do for myself over the years, having that element of the unknown. I think it's really important. If I was a photographer that knew that what I was going to be photographing every day, it'd become probably quite formulaic and a little bit
Yes.
boring for me. So having that uncertainty, and I think that's what continues to drive me as a photographer.
Yeah, it builds that excitement, right? Every day is a different day.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really important with the work I do. So just continue to do it.
very cool. Now, being selected for the World Press Photo Jupe Swart Masterclass is incredible. What
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that experience like, and what did you take away from it that influenced your art?
Being chosen into that masterclass was another little milestone in my career. I
Yeah,
think Australia in particular, in the field of documentary or street photography work that I do for my personal work, it's a pretty small market. So
yeah,
just apply for something overseas and be one of 12 people to be chosen for it back then was, I think, a really important step. And what that did was it got my work out to some European photo editors and book publishers and these sorts of things. And I think it just goes back to what we've been talking about, those little connections that you make and those friendships that you develop across any career, I think are what set you up for that next chapter in your work. So being part of that was just a really amazing opportunity, and one that I look back on and think how lucky I was to be chosen. And
Now, looking back, how do you feel the values and bonds you formed at Caulfield Grammar have stayed with you or influenced your career over the years?
I think it's definitely quite significant. Like I said
Yeah,
earlier, it's those friendships and those relationships that you form at school, whether it's with your friends or even with your teachers and mentors when you're at school. I think they're really key to setting you up, and it really instills a sense of what you're about and what's important to you and how you treat people and these sorts of things. And I think I've been lucky. I've been lucky to have sort of taken a lot of that on board, and I enjoyed my time at the school. I loved it. I've loved being still connected to the school with the photography that I've done for them over the years, and now as a parent. And I think it really sets you up and been amazing for me, and can't thank the school enough for those opportunities I was given.
And it seems to be a recurring theme with guests, actually, that it's the opportunities that you're given and provided to really obviously take hold of that as well, which is important. Now, what advice would you offer young photographers, especially Caulfield alumni, looking to follow a similar path about building a body of work and finding their artistic voice?
I think it's really important for any young creative person, whether it's photography or graphics or anything, or their own sort of art practice. I think what's important is that, artists or creatives find their own voice.
Yeah,
That's key. While we're at school and we're learning, we're always influenced by different photographers or artists or
yeah.
designers. But finding your own voice is really key, and that really unlocks that next phase in your work. And it's not an easy thing to do, and it can take time. And I think what's important is to not rush it. When you rush it, you're looking for, I'm not sort of talking to that kind of Instagram generation, but I think so many photographers and creatives are now, unfortunately, governed by things like Instagram and see that as the pinnacle. But
The
I think
ultimate.
what's really important is building up that foundation of things and different aspects to your work.
Hmm.
If you're relying on just one thing with your work, it can really shut you off. So I always encourage young photographers to just build that foundation up, build that network up of people that they know in the industry,
Yeah.
whether that's through networking opportunities or other sort of work
Hmm.
situations, or people or peers, people you went to school or college with. But so much of it is about sort of developing those relationships, but then also finding your own style and voice.
Yeah. And what's on the horizon for you now? Are there any new projects or ideas that you're excited to pursue in the coming years?
I've got a few things on the go. It's always important to continue to keep moving with your work. So I've got a couple of books I'm working on, and I've got some workshops that I'm teaching overseas later in the year. But the books are the big thing for me. I think it's really important to get the books out, keep them out in the world. They tick over in the background and they provide different opportunities. So I'm just working on those next couple of books, which potentially could be out later this year, early next year.
Now, do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Words of wisdom. Probably just goes back to if it's students at school or post school, it's that relationship building is really key to whatever you do, photography or business, whatever. It's building up those relationships and those connections. And I think they're the things that really set you up for whatever you're going to do.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for your reflections and contributions to photography and the Caulfield community, and we wish you all the best with your future endeavours.
Thanks so much, Doreen. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Heart Stories. A heartfelt thank you to our guests for sharing their story, wisdom, and passion with us today. Their insights remind us of what makes creativity, leadership, and community so impactful in shaping meaningful lives. Brought to you by the Caulfield Grammarians Association, this podcast celebrates the shared values that unite us and inspire us to grow, connect, and lead with purpose. We hope today's conversation has sparked reflection on your own story and the legacy you're building. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story. Share it with your friends, family, or anyone who could use a dose of inspiration. And be sure to join us next time for another powerful conversation with a guest who has a story worth telling. But until then, take care, stay curious, and continue making an impact. This is Heart Stories. See you next time.